Hello, my name is Anne McElhenney.
And my name is Phelim McAleer.
And welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop. It's week 90. That's 1 year and 9.5 months since the 2 weeks to flatten the curve lockdown.
It certainly is. It certainly is. Yes. So 2 weeks since the government said, just let us suspend your civil liberties for 2 weeks and it'll all be over. That's 90 weeks ago.
Yes.
So what's on the show today? All the details about Hunter Biden's laptop from hell. We interview our good friend Miranda Devine about her new book, which spills everything and really, really underlines why our Hunter Biden movie is so important.
Yes.
And what else is going on?
And abortion is now before the Supreme Court. Will they overturn Roe v. Wade? We read the tea leaves and ask, how is it that they're even weighing in on this subject?
Yeah, that's a disgrace in many ways. Gun laws for thee, but not for me. If you're liberal and cool like Alec Baldwin, there are two very different gun safety standards, which could see a mother and father face many years in prison and a Hollywood celebrity get off free.
And farewell, Fredo. Chris Cuomo is finally fired from CNN, but not for what he should have been fired for, and why he should not be the only one at CNN being canned.
Yeah. And New York Times is lying about Brazil climate change, but of course they are. We'll look at that. And wow. 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 Indeed. Women's college swimming records are being shattered. The only problem is it's not a woman doing it. How we're watching the destruction of women's sports before our very eyes.
And wokeism is everywhere.
In our favourite shows.
And in our favourite shows, you know that we like to watch. Like to watch TV procedurals so that you don't have to.
And now they just decide wokeism isn't enough, so now they're going to throw in some casual anti-Semitism. NBC's Law and Order wants you to know that Orthodox Jews are really, really awful people who just don't care about victims of crime. And
because we're Irish, we have a great new potato recipe, which we'll be bringing you from the patio later. You can never have too many potato recipes, I think. And we will be making an appeal for you to remember us at this time of the year, coming to the end of the year.
Yes, and the work we do.
You want to give money to us rather than the IRS, and we need it.
Yes.
But we're going to first of all go over now to this interview we did earlier with Miranda Devine, who
is a journalist, New York Post journalist, Australian journalist. Her new book is Laptop from Hell, and let's go over to that now. So welcome to our friend Miranda Devine, a journalist who's worked and been attacked by the left and maybe perhaps all 5 continents. We first met Miranda when she was one of the first journalists to review our Mind Your Own Business documentary.
It's kind of one of those magical things where we landed in Sydney and found the column about us in the Sydney Morning Herald. It was really, really fabulous.
Yeah, that was when we were on our Australian tour about 15 years ago. Miranda was based in Australia then. She's based in New York. She's a columnist for the New York Post. I think she's still a columnist for an Australian newspaper as well. She's also the author of Laptop from Hell, about a new book about our old friend Hunter Biden. It's an amazing book about an amazing subject. And I was checking, it was sold out over the weekend on Amazon. It's selling remarkably well. But I'm sure that means it will be ignored by the liars who construct the New York Times bestsellers list. So, but we'll talk about the New York Times bestseller list later. For now, we're looking forward to talking to Miranda and about her new book, Laptop from Hell. Welcome to the show, Miranda.
Thanks so much, Phelim and Anne. Great to be with you.
Great. So, well, I suppose the first question is, how do you know that the laptop is genuine and what's contained in it is genuine, and what you discuss in your book is genuine, and that you're not part of some Russian disinformation campaign?
We've had it for a year now, and the material in it, every email, that we've verified with the recipients, other recipients, and who have the same emails. The material that I used in the book from the laptop is really just one part of the puzzle. Another part of the puzzle, very importantly, was from Tony Bobulinski, who was Hunter's former business partner, a real unsung hero, who a patriot, a former naval veteran, a successful businessman in his own right, who got dragged into this nightmare of Hunter Biden and his shady influence peddling operation on behalf of his father all around the world. He came forward before the election last year. I have all his material, the contents of 3 of his phones with WhatsApp messages and emails and text messages and documents, which he, by the way, also handed over to the FBI. The FBI also has a copy of the laptop, the original that they were given by the MacBook repair shop owner. And so there's a lot of overlap with Tony Bobulinski's material with the laptop, but there's also some original material of his own. And then thirdly, where there's overlap with the laptop is from the very good inquiry conducted by 2 Republican senators last year, Chuck Grassley and Ron Johnson, into Hunter Biden, Burisma and corruption. And within that, they amassed a whole lot of documents from the Treasury Department, which are called suspicious activity reports, which is what banks are required to provide when there's sort of dodgy, shady money coming into American bank accounts, such as from, sanctioned people like the Russian oligarch Elena Baturina, who paid $3.5 million to a company, Rosemont Seneca Thornton, which was associated with Hunter Biden's partner, Devon Archer. So all of that material put together, it overlaps and it buttresses what's on the laptop. And finally, the laptop's also been verified, not by us, but by another media organization who had a cyber expert look at it and verified that it was real, authentic. And finally, at the New York Post, we have been publishing since October 13 last year material from the laptop, whether it be photographs or emails or text messages. And not once has the White House, the Biden campaign, or anybody involved said that this is, somehow not their laptop, not a real laptop. And Hunter Biden himself, when he wrote his memoir, Beautiful Things, earlier this year, he verified a lot of the information in the laptop, but as it pertained to his crack addiction and his antics, at the Chateau Marmont, for instance, where he spent months on end on these massive benders with Eastern European hookers and drug dealers and, coming in and stealing the bath towels and trashing the place. And he cooked his own crack over the 4-burner stove there. I mean, he admits all that. So he's, in his own way, verified material on the laptop that no one else would have known. And also when he was on his very softball interviews with CBS and the like for that book, he was asked whether it was his laptop and he couldn't give him a straight answer. He was like, oh, I can't remember. And oh, it certainly could be.
I think it's important to really look at why this is important, actually. This laptop shows corruption of Hunter Biden, but also importantly, using Joe Biden's name and Joe Biden's influence to help people who paid him many millions of dollars and he's quite clear about it, paid the Biden family. He was really the person who brought the money in and then dispersed it to other members of the Biden family. And we're talking about millions here, perhaps tens of millions of dollars. And then when this story broke last October, the mainstream media either suppressed it or refused to cover it and really fixed the election for the Bidens by suppressing this story. That's why this book is important. That's why our movie, My Son Hunter, is important.
Oh, absolutely. Also, you can't forget the role of big tech, the social media giants, Facebook and Twitter, who came in and censored the story, censored the New York Post, the 4th largest newspaper in the country, the oldest continuously published newspaper in the country. They flexed their muscles, came out of the shadows and showed how much power they have, more power than the sitting president of the United States, who they deplatformed at the time. So it also is important because it's not just that Joe Biden allowed his name to be used. He was intimately involved in this. He was orchestrating the introductions for Hunter to people like President Xi and his court. He invited Hunter to, State Department luncheons and state dinners to meet important people that were going to enrich the family. And also, there is evidence on the laptop that he financially benefited from the money that was coming in. It's not just emails, which...
When you say he, you mean President
Joe Biden?
President Biden, Joe Biden himself. There's the 10% for the big guy emails. We know all about that. But probably what's not as well known is that there is evidence on the laptop that Hunter and Joe Biden had mingled their finances. They had joint bank accounts. They had joint debit cards. And also some evidence that Hunter Biden was paying for bills for Joe Biden, whether it be an AT&T monthly phone bill or maintenance on his home in Delaware.
Oh yeah, there's very big evidence that he was paying the bills of contractors and various repairs and maintenance of Joe's rather large house in Delaware. Mm-hmm. And funny, we know someone who knows Delaware quite well and knows the Bidens, and they say growing up they were notorious for not paying their bills. Yes. Joe was notorious for not paying his bills. It was an honor to work for the Biden family, and that was enough. And maybe they got around this by getting Hunter to pay the bills. Eventually, when they couldn't get anyone else to work for them, Hunter paid the bills out of the corrupt earnings.
Well, it was funny because, the reason that we know about these bills being paid is because they were late, they were overdue, and it became an issue so that Hunter Biden sort of factotum in his company, a guy called 𝙁𝙤𝙤𝙃𝙪𝙣, was trying to he used to clean up all of Hunter's messes and look after the business when he went AWOL. And, basically Hunter was incapable of managing his own life. So 𝙁𝙤𝙤𝙃𝙪𝙣 did it. And he wrote in an email, itemized these bills that were overdue, some of them months overdue, to local contractors who were getting antsy about it. Several $1,000s for each, a retaining wall being fixed, some painting, some air conditioning being replaced in a little cottage. This money for these small contractors was mounting. And so that's why we know that Joe Biden was benefiting financially in terms of his regular bills being paid for his lifestyle. And, Joe Biden always talks about himself as if, he boasts that he's the poorest member of Congress. He's done that for ages. It's part of his brand that he's, humble lunch pail Joe from Scranton, Pennsylvania. In fact, he lives a champagne lifestyle. He has very expensive taste in clothes and housing, and his entire family lives this life of immense privilege, going to Ivy League colleges and having grace and favor jobs. And there's a scene in the book where I talk about Hunter's cousin Caroline, who was a wayward cousin who was arrested a few times, and her father is Jim Biden, who was Joe's younger brother. And she's given a grace and favor job, but I think it was only $80,000 a year. And she said, I can't live on $80,000 a year. She's a graduate from university, and I can't possibly. That's just pocket money for me. So these entire family was living in the lap of luxury based on nothing except Joe Biden's favor trading, his Tammany Hall style influence peddling.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, one of the things that we constantly say to people is that as Irish people, we can't speak much about addiction. Can't be nasty to people about addiction. And certainly this movie that we're making is not, that's not something that we're interested in doing. However, given the fact that we're Irish and we know quite a lot about addiction and what happens to people with serious addictions, I have to say, reading your book and also reading, The Beautiful Things by Hunter Biden, he seems to have had the most extraordinary luck when it came to, the dissolute life that he lived. Most people do end up in some awful, rehab forever. He never seemed to be punished or suffer at all, actually, for this dissolute life, and in fact seemed to have just gone from one fabulous thing happening to another fabulous thing happening.
It's very interesting that you say that, because all around him, everybody else was being jailed or disappearing or being murdered, and yet he just seemed to emerge smelling like roses. And he was a very heavy crack addict, and he's a pitiful figure. And I agree. I mean, there's some sympathy for him. He had a lot of tragedy in his early life, and a father who was absent, basically, and who was an inveterate liar, and it must be and with a bad temper. So I can't imagine it must have been easy for this motherless boy to cope with that. A father he adored, but also was deeply flawed. But I have a suspicion just from reading how lucky he was, how he had 9 lives, he was in very dangerous positions. I mean, one night he turns up face down in a swimming pool in a luxury hotel in Las Vegas. And there are Russian drug dealers rifling through his property and stealing his laptop, etc. He was in these very dangerous situations, mostly overseas. And yet he always seemed to have a guardian angel watching over him. And it wasn't just the Secret Service, because he waved them away halfway through this. I suspect, and I can't believe, that the American intelligence services weren't keeping an eye on him, weren't aware of what he was doing. He was deep in the inner sanctum of both Vladimir Putin and President Xi. Whether he was debriefed by the intelligence services when he came home, I mean, there's some indication of that. There were certain, entries in his diary, but certainly they must have known and been aware of what he was doing, which makes it doubly insane that he was allowed to do this, to be bumbling around the world in the center of these, geopolitical minefields, this huge energy deal between Russia and China. I often say that it doesn't really speak well for the character of Joe Biden that he would allow his very addicted son to be placed in such temptation in front of gushing torrents of unaccountable cash. But it doesn't say much for the intelligence services that they allowed that to continue.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, just for people, can you give us, let's say the top 5 most outrageous business and personal failings of Hunter Biden, business deals and personal craziness of Hunter Biden, just to give an example of the money that was coming in and the lifestyle he was leading?
Well, I guess if you go chronologically from the beginning of Joe Biden's vice presidency, you're looking at, first of all, Burisma, the Ukrainian corrupt energy company. For no discernible reason, Hunter Biden was placed on the board of that. He was earning $83,333 a month. And all he did was turn up to Monaco or Paris for a luxurious board meeting once a year. And to show you why he was being paid that kind of money, all I really need to do is tell you that a few weeks after Joe Biden's term as vice president ended, Hunter Biden's payment from Burisma was cut in half. So that pretty much says it all. And, the other interesting thing about Burisma was that it was run by an oligarch, a guy called 𝙁𝙤𝙤𝙃, who was a minister in the previous Russia-aligned government. And then the Americans got involved, the State Department, in ousting in fomenting the Maidan Revolution and bringing in a non-Russia-aligned president in Poroshenko. At the time, the State Department was really trying to get a handle and stop the corruption that was in Ukraine. And Ukraine was broke because the previous 𝙁𝙤𝙃's guys had completely ripped off, that there was hardly anything left in the coffers. They'd stolen hundreds of millions, billions of dollars. And so Joe Biden went over there waving the flag of anti-corruption. And yet at the same time, his son was in bed with 𝙁𝙤𝙃, whose only purpose, and it's obvious in the emails, of hiring Hunter Biden and his mate Devin Archer to be on the board at this great expense, was so that they could get the authorities off 𝙁𝙤𝙃 and Burisma's back. And Joe Biden, pretending to be the corruption fighter, ends up forcing the government there to fire their chief prosecutor, Viktor Shokin, who was at that very time investigating Burisma. And he had just seized the property of 𝙁𝙤𝙃, these houses and mansions in Kiev and a Rolls-Royce Phantom car. And Joe Biden told the public, and it was swallowed by the New York Times and Washington Post and so on, that Viktor Shokin, the prosecutor, was not doing anything about corruption and was corrupt himself. And any journalist could have found out that was not true just from the contemporaneous media accounts in Ukraine and elsewhere in Europe at the time. So there's that. And then the China deals in themselves, I mean, there were two big deals from China. And the first one was came about after Joe Biden flew Hunter with him into Beijing on Air Force Two in 2013 for these meetings with President Xi and the high ups in the CCP. And, you know, for the Chinese, it was obvious what was happening. This was American power come to do private business. Hunter Biden was a beast that the Chinese know well, a princeling. That is the sons or the grandchildren, the wives, the relatives of CCP officials, high ups in state-owned enterprises, the elites, and they get bribed, not directly, but through family members. And so it was pretty obvious, probably more obvious to the Chinese what was going on than it was to American eyes, because nothing was ever really said much about this really inappropriate behavior of Joe Biden. Not only Beijing, but he flew Hunter on Air Force Two for all sorts of business assignations overseas, whether it be Moscow. He also flew his business partners.
It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
It's amazing. Imagine if Donald Trump did that, flew Jared in whilst Jared was hawking a business deal, or Donald Trump Jr. was working on a business deal. I mean,
we'd never hear the end.
We never heard the end of the fact that they were working in the White House, trying to foment peace in the Middle East.
Salary free. Yeah.
Salary free. Yeah, we never heard the end of that. But imagine if they were on Air Force One, trying to do a deal in Saudi Arabia as the president flew in to talk to the president.
So the book is chock full of these extraordinary stories, and we're at the end we're going to remind everybody of where they can get the book. But I think you were hinting at it a little bit earlier there, Phil. So the book came out. What day did the book come out, Miranda?
It came out last Tuesday, November 30.
Right, and I think your sales are fabulous on Amazon. Has that been reflected?
Straight number one.
There you go, straight to number one on Amazon.
Yep.
So Amazon, we've had this experience ourselves. Where Amazon, you can't sense, Amazon, it's just the numbers. It's just based on the numbers. So that's reflective of exactly the kind of numbers of books have been sold. And to be number one on Amazon is massive. So has this been reflected also in the New York Times then, Miranda?
No, but they are a week behind. Yes. And so I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. I don't want to jinx it yet. They come out Wednesday for the previous week. And I'm told by my publisher that they did call him, say that they were tracking it, ask for some books, ask how it was going. So, maybe it might make an appearance. Who knows?
Who knows?
We'll be watching.
We'll be watching. We just want to spell out what happens here now. And we're recording this before Wednesday, so let's see on Wednesday what happens. But with our book, we were number 3 in Amazon for days. It was eventually sold out everywhere. And the New York, so that's numbers. New York Times looked at that number 3 number and decided that didn't allow us to get into any of the top 20 of the New York Times bestsellers list. So that's what you're up against.
I've heard that before.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and then we've investigated this. So the New York Times bestseller list is not actually based on numbers. It's an editorial decision. Right,
it's a curated list.
It's a committee, and it's a fake news number, designed by a committee of fake news people, and maybe they'll be embarrassed, but actually these people have no embarrassment.
Well, let's see,
and maybe they'll tell the truth this time.
We don't want to jinx anything. Where can people buy your book, Miranda?
They can buy them at bookstores, whether it be Barnes and Nobles, Books A Million, a lot of independent bookstores, liberal bookstores have actually been phoning up and asking for copies. So pretty much, I think any bookstore. It did run out in the hardcover, but they're going to be replenished shortly. And the paperback's available, of course, in the ebook and so on, and they're all selling well.
And do you have an audio book?
Have an audio book as well. That was actually number 2 to Will Smith. Yeah.
Oh, I like it. And it's interesting because we have noticed that we have an audiobook of our book, and actually there are a lot of people who that's how they read books nowadays. So it's really good to know that there is an audiobook, so people can get that on Audible. And obviously, basically, you can buy Miranda's book everywhere where books are sold, and it's called The Laptop from Hell by our friend Miranda Devine.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Miranda before we went, by the way, I just wanted to ask her about Australia, by the way, just a quick word about Australia, because I think a lot of people who are listening to this show obviously are concerned about COVID and are concerned about the what's happening to democracy and civility and humanity in Australia. What is happening in your country, Miranda?
Tell us.
Well, it looks horrendous. I will only say in Australia's defence that most of the videos and the atrocities that you are seeing are not coming from the largest state where I'm from, New South Wales, which is fairly sensible. I would call it the Florida of Australia. Most of the worst things are happening in Victoria, which we call the socialist state. I mean, it actually is run by a premier, which is like the governor, who is a socialist. And he's very popular, though. So there are Australians who, because they really haven't been hit by COVID, they don't understand it, they have no natural immunity, they closed the borders early on. And you know, while people were dropping like flies in New York, they were sort of smugly living a normal life and not wearing masks and so on. But at some point, reality had to kick in. They were slow to get vaccinated. They've now, I think, the fastest uptake in the world. And so I think that perhaps the fear is dying down. But once politicians have a taste of that power, as we know everywhere in the world, they just keep on ratcheting it up. Everyone's been terrified crazily about this stupid Omicron variant, which looks, you know, the evidence so far looks to be pretty mild. And, you know, as a person who was double vaccinated, who caught COVID very mildly from another vaccinated person, my husband who was vaccinated caught it from me. You know, the idea of having vaccine mandates makes zero sense. And also, you know, I try to tell people in Australia, but you don't really know it until you live it, I guess, that this virus is now, we have treatments for it, we have vaccines. The variants may be following the track of normal viruses and becoming more contagious but milder. So it's not, and children and young people really aren't affected. And so it's something, I just think fear has got hold of Australia, and they're in the sort of period that we were back last March and April.
One of the questions I wanted to ask was, you know, has anyone come up with a total of how much money Hunter Biden earned, let's say, whilst Joe was vice president, or when Joe was in his most powerful period? Has anyone come up with a total? To me, it's tens of millions. Is it more?
I don't know. It's definitely tens of millions, but we don't know exactly how much one of the Chinese investments is worth. It's 10% of BHR, which was the business that Hunter Biden was tipped into when Joe took him to Beijing in 2013. Now he had 10% of that business. On the laptop, there are documents showing that in 2019 it had $2.5 billion of funds under management. Now, you don't know how much his 10% is worth until it's harvested. But just as an example, one of the investments they had was a company called Face++, which is a facial recognition company which is implicated in atrocities against the Uyghurs in China. Now, that their, I can't remember the exact amount, it was in the millions. I think they had 1.8% of it, but that investment doubled since they bought it to 2019. So that's a pretty penny, you know, several $1 million there for Hunter. And if you multiply that across the other investments, maybe some investments didn't do so well. There's a company that Hunter Biden owns called 𝙎𝙤𝙤𝙃. And as of July, or in fact, as of like a couple of days ago when I checked again, the Chinese websites are showing that 𝙎𝙤𝙤𝙃 owns still 10% of BHR. Now, since July, something has happened to 𝙎𝙤𝙤𝙃. It's become dormant on the Delaware websites. And I noticed that one of Hunter's new lawyers has told the New York Times, which did a story about, sort of related about the cobalt investments that BHR made, that Hunter it was very clever language, but it's sort of not associated or something with 𝙎𝙤𝙤𝙃. Now, I don't understand how that can be possible because there's no sale or anything of 𝙎𝙤𝙤𝙃, but because it's gone dormant, I guess technically that could be a reason. They're playing silly games because we know that Jen Psaki, the White House press spokesman, has been asked about this a number of times over the last year. And every time she says, Hunter Biden is working to unwind his ownership of BHR. That means that Hunter Biden the president's son, is in partnership with the Chinese Communist Party. Yeah. BHR is a Chinese Communist Party company. Mm-hmm. So so that's all those millions. And then there's, talk of, I couldn't ever get to the bottom of it, of money stashed away in Virgin Islands and various offshore companies. I mean, Delaware itself is an incredibly opaque jurisdiction, and which is why so many American corporates are headquartered there. And there are various companies associated with Hunter and his partners that you just have no visibility into. Yeah. But anyway, what we know on the record, tens of millions of dollars. Yeah,
well, that's very worth repeating. I think, that the White House spokesperson is still saying to journalists, and journalists are accepting it, that the president's son is working to unwind from his involvement in a several billion dollar, $2.5 billion investment fund owned by the Chinese Communist government. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's an amazing, that's a book in itself. I mean, and it sort of brings me on to the way the media suppressed this story. And now the New York Times recently discovered the Cobalt story. Yeah. I mean, and it was basically a rewrite of a story that I think was the Washington Examiner had done. I mean, it was almost, they even repeated the same mistakes in my opinion. The Washington Examiner wrote the story about Hunter's involvement in a Chinese company, that weird involvement with a Chinese company that basically has controlled all of the Democratic Republic of Congo's cobalt mining industry, which means they control a lot of the world's cobalt mining industry. And this was all reported in detail before the election. The mainstream media ignored it. And now the New York Times is deciding to reluctantly report on it. And the only reason they're reporting on it is because cobalt has become really cool because of COP26 or whatever. And this rush to push us all into electric cars.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, it's an interesting little tidbit about the author of that New York Times story. He actually used to work for Bloomberg. And he was one of the reporters who quite courageously reported on a sort of bribery and offshore accounts of President Xi's relatives. And that caused Bloomberg himself, Michael Bloomberg, great heartburn. His terminals were sort of banned, and his company in China would have just gone belly up if they didn't immediately stop that second story that was coming up and bury the story and so on. And various Bloomberg people had to resign over it, including this guy who's now at the New York Times. So I thought that there might be, a chance for some honesty. I sent him a copy of the book. I haven't heard back, but I think also it's worth remembering that the second deal that Hunter did with CEFC, CEFC China is the capitalist arm of President Xi's Belt and Road Initiative, which is, of course, the imperialist push into the rest of the world. What the Belt and Road does is it goes to places like the Congo and it bribes leaders to give them monopoly access to things like cobalt, rare minerals, and so on, wherever they are in the world. That's how they work. And in fact, one of Hunter's business partners at CEFC, Patrick Ho, was arrested at JFK by the Southern District of New York, precisely because he'd been caught bribing and was convicted of bribing various African leaders at the UN. And the way he did that was because CEFC, when the chairman, Xi Jinping, came to New York, he was feted by the great and the good. I mean, he was rubbing shoulders at dinner parties with Wilbur Ross and Kissinger and important people, and going to the Lincoln Center and invited to dinner parties. He had this $50 million penthouse and various other lavish real estate purchases. And he was very close to Hunter Biden, and he was the right hand. He was promoted by the Chinese army, PLA, and also was mentored by President Xi. He's now disappeared, but you can't sort of understate the involvement of the Bidens with China's Belt and Road. And when Joe Biden was vice president, for the last 2 years of his vice presidency, Hunter and his partners were doing work around the world, as in using the Biden name to open doors in places like Romania and other places, Kazakhstan and so on behalf of CEFC. But they weren't paid cash until after Joe Biden left office. And that was the point of it. And CEFC was the company that Joe Biden was, that was his sort of retirement project. And that was why he met with Tony Bobulinski in the Beverly Hills Hilton to vet him to be the CEO of this company. And there's a scene in the book where Hunter Biden is in a New York restaurant pounding the table and shouting at Director Zhang, who was the 2IC of CEFC. And Hunter's there banging the table and shouting at Director Zhang, causing his partners like Tony Bobulinski to get ulcers, because this guy is a powerful guy, could get anyone whacked. And Hunter's just furious. And he's saying, you owe my family $20 million for the work that we have done for you the last 2 years around the world. Now that's in 2017, just a few months after Joe Biden ceases to be vice president. So this is, I think, very important. It's something that Tony Bobulinski has emphasized, which is that while Joe Biden was vice president for 2 years, his family was working on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party to promote the Belt and Road Initiative around the world.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, so you know, you said you sent a copy of the book to the reporter with the New York Times. Have you had any response? And has any mainstream media outlet been in touch with you for tidbits, to review the book, or even to do an interview or to cover the book in any way?
Well, by mainstream media, you mean the other half, the Democrat-leaning, Trump-hating, Joe Biden-loving media, New York Times, Washington Post, etc. CNN, MSNBC, no, just complete silence, no interest at all. Look, Michael Forsyth, ex-Bloomberg, I respect him as a journalist. So, you know, he has the book, maybe he'll do something with it. I mean, I also offered him, since he had reported about BHR, I offered him the board papers of BHR that I have on the laptop covering a couple of years, which have exactly, I haven't gone into the boring detail in the book, but there's great detail about, you know, the cobalt sales and other rare mineral sales, which, I mean, you know, the New York Times runs stories that run, you know, as long as a book. I don't know if anyone reads them. So they've got ample room to cover it. Yeah,
no, the internet means there's ample room for all these stories now. And New York Times, as you say, they're very fond of long stories. I mean, just to, let me summarize the cobalt story. Maybe you'll correct me if it's wrong. The Chinese government wanted to buy a cobalt mine off an American company, but rather than buy it off the American company directly, they arranged for Hunter Biden's company to buy it, and then they bought it off Hunter Biden's company. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was the business model. And that was why it was good for the Communist Party to have these big names like Joe Biden's son on their board as a shareholder. I mean, it's explicitly said in some of the emails with the Chinese business partners is Guilo faces on the board. And look, Hunter and his partners like Devon Archer used to carry around the world sort of autobiographies or biographies or something of Joe Biden's life story, books. Yeah. There were presents that they would give people.
Just in case you forget who we are.
Who we're connected with, who we're working
with. Yeah. Exactly.
Well, Miranda, thank you very much. Have you anything?
Yeah, no, this has been great. We really appreciate it. It's fantastic.
And we think your book's going to be a huge seller. And we're going to write out to people on our email list to buy it. It'll be a great Christmas present for someone.
And we'll give all the links on our show. So yeah, so that people will have no difficulty getting it in all the formats that it's available.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, and good luck with the movie. I cannot wait to see it. I think it'll be a perfect companion to the book.
Yes,
very much so. Actually, as we listen to you telling quite a number of those stories, we're kind of smiling to ourselves here because those very stories have been reenacted in the film. So yeah, brilliant. We look forward to sharing that with you. Okay. All right, Miranda, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Anna.
Amazing. So yes, it's available still on Amazon.com and or wherever you buy your books. That's, just to me, it really underlines, as we said during the interview, why our movie is so important. Truth about this was suppressed, why it's important that truth is put out there, and why you should donate to the Hunter Biden movie to make it happen. We finished filming, principal photography is finished now, but we still need a lot of help, music, reshooting, editing, all the, marketing, many parts of the movie still have to be brought together. We have some great ideas for music, but everything costs money. And do you want the IRS to keep your money, or do you want to give it to us? Look, this is a war. This is people say, as Miranda said in her book, if people had known about this laptop and what was in it, they would have changed their vote at the last election. So we're not looking to get people to change their vote. We're looking to get people to tell the truth, be told the truth. And that's important. So please go to mysonhunter.com, give what you can, and even give what you can't. Stretch yourself a little bit at this time of year.
Yes.
And please, mysonhunter.com. So Supreme Court, Anne.
Yes.
Big case in the Supreme Court.
Big case in the Supreme Court, the Roe v. Wade, so the oral arguments were heard the other day, and we will find out what they've decided, I think, at the end of June, maybe early July.
Dobbs, who's some no-name bureaucrat from the state of Mississippi, whose name will forever be associated with this case,
right,
poor fella. And then Jackson's Women's Health Organization, who I assume are an abortion clinic. I don't know who Jackson is. Maybe it's Michael Jackson. I don't know. And this is all about, of course, Roe v. Wade. And Scott G. Stewart, Solicitor General for Jackson, Mississippi. Mr. Chief Justice, may it please the court. Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey haunt our country. They have no basis in the Constitution. They have no home in our history or traditions. They have damaged the democratic process. They've poisoned the law. They've choked off compromise. For 50 years, they've kept this court at the centre of a political battle it can never resolve. And 50 years on, they stand alone. Nowhere else does this court recognise the right to end human life. So Mr. Stewart opens with a statement which really sums up the issue with Roe v. Wade. Mr. Stewart, the very opening. Mr. Chief Justice, may it please the court. Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey haunt our country. They have no basis in the Constitution. They have no home in our history or traditions. They've damaged the democratic process. They've poisoned the law. They've choked off compromise. For 50 years, they've kept this court at the centre of a political battle that it can never resolve. And 50 years on, they stand alone. Nowhere else does this court recognise a right to end human life. The Roe versus Wade cases have actually corrupted the courts, I think, and have corrupted the process of nominating judges. I mean, Justice Kavanaugh and all these judges, when they're up before the Senate, they always say, I would be very loath, I would never overrule court precedents, and I think it's called 𝙬𝙬𝙘 𝙬𝙬, the role of precedent. And, no one believes them, right? They don't, I'm not even sure it's this weird political theatre that shouldn't be. And of course, Kavanaugh got there, and when he started talking about this case, he began, listing major cases, and as he said, there's a string of them that had overturned earlier precedents. Brown versus Board of Education, I think that overturned segregation. Baker versus Carr, West Coast Hotel versus Parish, all these cases, the case that outlawed slavery, Oberville versus Hodges. He listed a list of cases that were set precedent, often for a long time. And as Kavanaugh said, I could go on. And those are some of the most consequential and important in the court's history. And he said the Dobbs case, which is the abortion case, if prior precedents are seriously wrong, can't the court pursue the right answer? If the court had never overturned precedents, this country would be a much different place. And of course it was. So this idea that you should never overturn precedents is a joke, is incorrect. And it's a joke that they go through Senate hearings claiming that is something important.
And talking of abortion, you'll remember last week we had that extraordinary photograph the most amazing photograph of the 20th century, according to The Guardian. And it got a lot of response. A lot of people got in touch with us about that, including...
That was the picture of an 18-week-old fetus. It was part of a collection of babies in the womb
taken by this man from Sweden. So one of the responses we got was from Maren T, who said, please try and find the amazing photo of a surgeon operating on a baby in its mother's womb when a tiny hand popped through the incision and grasped the little finger of the surgeon. The baby's name was Sam. So I started looking for that and thought I had found it. Atkins' baby girl, still inside her mother's womb, reached out and grabbed her OBGYN's finger. Realising how special the moment was, Dr. Alan Sawyer, who has also delivered Atkinson's other 2 children, called to her husband Randy to grab the camera. Funny thing is that Atkins, the woman, the mother of the baby, actually was a professional photographer herself. But anyway, the very funny thing is that wasn't the photograph that the person who wrote to us on YouTube was referring to at all. They were referring to a different photograph taken. And by the way, it's very weird and strange, by the way, that this whole thing started with the photograph from last week, which I had discovered going down a rabbit hole on Twitter, looking at people talking about the abortion debate and all of that. And I'd found that particular photograph. And now this has brought me down a rabbit hole, which is actually really interesting. So I'm very grateful to Maren for sending that request, because the true photograph that Maren was referring to, by the way, I think the C-section photograph is extraordinary. But the one that Maren was referring to is from 1999. And it's this photograph that you can see right now. And the story behind this story is that in late 1999, the closing days of the millennium, a story broke about a popular picture that was being emailed around the world. There were 2 children involved in this, but this is the particular one, this particular story of this particular child, Sam, who had spina bifida, and they had come up with
This is in Vanderbilt Hospital, Nashville, and the surgeon was operating on the baby in the womb, in utero, and somehow the child is pictured grabbing the surgeon's hand, and it became a famous picture, and became very controversial because, and I'll just read to you actually what the doctor said. So here's what the doctor said. The photo has become an icon depending on your political point of view. This is either Samuel Armas, that's the name of the baby, reaching out of the uterus and touching the finger of a fellow human being, or it's me pulling his hand out of the uterus, which is what I did. The baby did not reach out. The baby was anaesthetized. The baby was not aware of what was going on. Both mother and fetus. This is what the doctor says. However, exactly. However, the parents disagree. The parents and the parents are actually saying no doctor wants to admit that the baby who was supposed to be anaesthetized would actually be able to grab the doctor's hand, but they claim the doctor's hand was grabbed.
And there's another wrinkle.
There's a big wrinkle on this.
No, but even before the wrinkle that I think you're thinking about, there's another wrinkle about this, because this child had been diagnosed at, I think, 14 weeks with spina bifida, and the parents had been urged to have an abortion. So that's another one of the small little wrinkles as well.
Yes.
And in fact, that family then actually later, and I know there's another story we have to tell about this, which is an amazing story that I'm really glad we were brought here by you, Maren, because this is really worth hearing. But the other thing about that family was that they actually appeared before the US Senate Subcommittee on Science, Technology and Space to talk about the photograph with their baby, who was then 4 years old. And here's what they said. Today, Samuel was nearly 4 years old. Of course, this is, again, as I said, this is back in 2003. Today is nearly 4 years old and has not had to endure the surgeries that are common for most children with spina bifida. He's walking with leg braces, is cognitively normal, and looks and loves looking for bugs.
And this is the baby that they were told to abort.
Most 4-year-olds did. But here's the thing that I thought is brilliant about the story. Really, very, very interesting. There's a Drudge connection here.
Matt Drudge,
Matt Drudge.
The editor of Drudge Report. Yeah, so he had a Fox News show, and it was 1999, and
it was a Fox News channel. Drudge wanted, so he wanted to use the image. He wanted to use Samuel's image on his November 13 show, but Fox News directors refused to allow him to display the image, and because of that, he actually walked out on Fox. He said to them, "That's it, I'm done," because he wanted to show the reason.
Well, let's be quite clear. The Fox News directors, and they're openly quoted saying this. And this shows you how the world has moved on. Back in 1999, directors of Fox News refused to allow Matt Drudge to use a photograph of a baby in the womb, holding the hand of a surgeon, because they believed he used it to promote an anti-abortion message. And that it would misrepresent what the photograph actually was. Now, that's ridiculous. The photograph may be the photograph of an operation, it may be the photograph of spina bifida, but it is also the photograph of the viability and life of a baby, because you cannot subtract that from the photograph that it is. So Matt Drudge, when they refused to let him use it, he walked off the show, and that was a big thing then. Walking away from a Fox News show,
Fox News TV show. I mean, I actually never knew this story about Matt Drudge, but it gives me a very newfound respect for him.
No, then Matt has now gone completely lefty.
That. But I think on this issue, obviously, he was willing. It was the one that he was willing to walk on, and I think well done him. And it brings up kind of the issue, because now, with, as we talked about earlier, about Roe v. Wade being re-litigated now in the Supreme Court, there's an awful lot. We're going to be for the next 6 months, for sure. Everyone's going to be hearing an awful lot about abortion, and I think one of the most powerful. And I remember writing this, by the way, in the introduction to the Gosnell book. I remember writing about the photographs that we discovered that were used in the court case in Gosnell, the actual photographs of the children whose bodies had been recovered from the clinic, and who were photographed by the ME's office in high definition, and are extraordinary photographs. And I think the line I used in the introduction of the book was that they were the unimpeachable, they're an unimpeachable testimony to the humanity of these children. And I think this is the problem. Yes. With all of these photographs. Yes. There is a problem with these photographs. So the photograph we had last week, which the Guardian had even acknowledged was the greatest photograph of the 20th century, major controversy to do with the photograph. And it's like, what's the controversy actually? What's wrong with the photo? Just show the photograph. And the problem with the photograph is the photograph speaks so eloquently to the humanity of children at the earliest possible stage, at a stage when it is perfectly legal in the United States of America and many other parts of the world to just destroy that humanity, that life. Yeah. And I think actually, if anything, Phelim, I think one thing that makes me clear about is we need more of these photographs, not less.
I want to say, when these people did this in 1999 is not 100 years ago, right? It's 22 years ago now. These are Fox News executives. The Republican establishment does not hate abortion. The Republican establishment is either pro-abortion or they are scared of the topic. This is why you should be very worried about the Supreme. If you are pro-life, you should be very worried about whether the Supreme Court will deliver. This is why you should be also very worried if the Supreme Court does deliver, because the most likely thing they will do is send it back to the states. And up until now, all these people have been elected on pro-life tickets. I'm going to save the babies, going to save the babies, going to save the babies. And then they get in and they go, well, I'd love to outlaw abortion in Kansas, in Tennessee, in Alabama. But we all know that when it gets to the Supreme Court, it'll be shot back. So there's no point in even passing legislation. Let's see how much legislation will be passed by these states now. And they're going to have to run for elections on this. They're going to be asked about this in hustings. They're going to be asked difficult questions. They're going to have to talk about heaven and hell. They're going to have to talk about life and death. They're going to have to talk about humanity. They're going to have to talk, and this is not quoting you won't be able to get away by quoting a Reagan cliche about a shining city on a hill, or the 8 most dangerous words in the English language. I'm from the government. I'm here to help you in small government. That won't work when you're asked these difficult questions, these philosophical questions about where you stand on life and what is a life. They will they have the courage to follow through and pass laws and keep those laws and not water down those laws? Let's see. Because there's one person who fears. There was one group of people who the leftists fear the destruction of Roe v. Wade. But I'll tell you, the Republican establishment really, really fear the destruction of Roe v. Wade. And you were Peggy Noonan was talking about.
Yeah, funny. I really liked Peggy. Well, I don't. I'm much less of a fan of Peggy Noonan recently, of recent times. But she had a piece in the Wall Street Journal recently about the Supreme Court decision that's facing them now. And I just thought there was a couple of paragraphs that I wanted to share with you. And I think we've kind of mentioned this already earlier, but I really thought I thought she really put her finger on this, and I was impressed with the way she described this. She says, "Why has abortion so roiled this country for half a century? In other cases, when courts saw a new constitutional right or liberalised the social order in some way, the public acclamated. So Brown versus Board of Education was accepted over the years. Gay marriage was followed by public acceptance. The court had spoken. When the court took prayer out of public schools in 1962 and held that interracial couples had a right to marry in 1967, high public disapproval on those issues immediately began to decline. But abortion was different. Opposition to Roe became more hostile after its issuance," writes Joshua Prager. And she's actually referring to this Joshua Prager, who's written this, she says, definitive book on Roe v. Wade.
And the book's called Family Roe. I must buy that.
She said he's pro-choice, but that actually the book is absolutely extraordinary in terms of its detailed accounting of the history of what happened. But here's what she says. There are many reasons. So basically, the point she's saying that, so abortion was different. Opposition to Roe became more hostile after its issuance, and she said there are many reasons, but she puts her finger on this, and I think it's great. But I think the biggest is that all those other rulings are about how to live. Roe involved death. Inescapably, and at its heart, we have spent 40 years looking at sonograms and carrying in our wallets or phones the black and white copy of the ultrasound that when you first saw it, you thought, this is real. She's already got my feet. It's hard to ignore the meaning of that. She's there.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really, really powerful. All the other decisions weren't about death. This decision is about the death of another human being, and that's the reason it's roiling everyone. That's the reason the country is the way it is at the moment. And it's only going to get worse. For the next 6 months, you're going to hear nothing but the left are going nuts over this. And guess what? We're going to have something to say ourselves. And we have a project.
We're working on a top secret project.
Top secret project.
That will have a lot to say about this.
We'll have a lot to say about this.
Yeah, we'll talk about that later on.
And not on time, but just remember that.
So I want to talk about my old friend Alec Baldwin now. Alec's had a rough time recently. You know, he thought it was bad when his wife was uncovered as a fraud. And now he was on the set. Everyone knows this story. He's on the set of a movie, Rust. He has a gun in his hand that he thinks is unloaded. The gun goes off. Let's say we'll talk about. He's holding
it when it goes off.
Yes, he's holding it when it goes off. He said, and a woman dies and a man was injured. So he gave an interview to his. Let's be honest, to his buddy George Stephanopoulos. Now they don't say that on the ABC program, but these guys are friends. Remember, Alec Baldwin. And I have some history, just want to get that out there. He invited me to debate fracking. He asked somebody to nominate someone to debate fracking at the Hamptons International Film Festival. They nominated me. He was fine with that. And then his friend, Josh Fox, said, you can't have me. He must have done some research then, and then started attacking me on Twitter, making jokes about my name, my nationality. Said I smelled like a pig. I think, all it smelled like gas. I can't remember exactly. He said some very interesting things about the Harvey Weinstein moral panic. He said some very interesting things in defense of Woody Allen. When they tried to destroy him. So he doesn't follow the script all the time. But let me tell you, I wasn't very impressed with his interview. He basically threw the victim under the bus. It's all her fault. He is an innocent man. In the aftermath of the shooting, there was a torrent of criticism, and basically people saying you shouldn't point a gun at someone unless you want to destroy that person. And Alec Baldwin, let's hear his response.
It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them, never.
Yeah, Alec, just because the director of photography as your mother used to say, if she told you to stick your hand in the fire, would you do it? Right? This isn't someone who's inexperienced with guns telling you to point a gun at them and you pointing a gun at them. it doesn't absolve you from responsibility. You are responsible for that weapon in your hand. And he then goes on to say he never pulled a trigger. According to experts, that's nonsense.
It's not possible.
It's not possible. And the only way it is possible if the gun was hugely defective, and it was so defective it probably wouldn't have fired.
Well, they'll be able to discover that, right?
Yes, they'll be able. I mean, I think what the problem was he probably didn't pull the trigger. He probably had the trigger already pulled. He was holding it by the trigger, and when he cocked it back, that was the two processes needed were already done. But he never pulled the trigger because he was holding it, thinking that he had to do some other action. What really caught my eye, though, was him telling George Stephanopoulos that he'd been told by people within the state that it was highly unlikely that he'd be criminally charged in relation to the shooting. So I'd love to know, by the way, so he's been told by people within the state, in other words, his liberal friends high up in the state. I'd love to know who he's been speaking to and who is saying that, and are these important people putting pressure on the sheriff who's still carrying out an investigation? We need to know this. And if there's going to be a grand jury investigation, I'd like him to be under oath asking who those people are and what authority they have to say that, and why are they interfering with an investigation that's still ongoing. But I also want to draw attention to how he's been treated with kid gloves there, and he's been told he's not going to face charges. And the school shooting, the recent school shooting, Oxford school shooting in Michigan, where the parents who were not there, where the parents who did not pull a trigger, the parents who did not cock a gun, the parents who did not point a gun, they're being charged with involuntary manslaughter because the gun was not locked up properly, allegedly, and they're denying this, and because they were not strict enough about making sure gun safety. Well, if they can be charged with involuntary manslaughter for allowing their son to have access to a firearm, which I believe legally he was entitled to handle as well, if they are going to be charged with involuntary manslaughter just for allowing their son access to the firearm, how does that compute with Alec Baldwin not facing charges for pointing a gun, a real gun, at a woman and cocking it back and not checking that it wasn't loaded beforehand? To me, those are two separate standards. But American justice is now one justice for the elite and the other justice for the rest of us. And this is just another example of that. So what have we got? Oh yeah, Chris Cuomo. I don't want to spend too much time because it's a long enough program.
But I think the one thing we want to say about Chris Cuomo is that he got fired, and it seems to be that he got fired because he helped his brother, try to get away from these scandals involving him being an alleged sex predator. We think that Chris Cuomo should have lost, or not Chris Cuomo, that the brother.
Yes, Chris
Cuomo should have lost his job long before that, and actually for the egregious thing of lying about the quarantine thing.
Yeah.
Here's a guy who and CNN, CNN went along with this.
Yeah, let me give you the background to what the story is. Yeah, Chris Cuomo got COVID and made a big thing about quarantining for 2 weeks in his basement, away from his family, away from his children, and then made a big thing, and let's watch that now. Him coming up the stairs, and CNN, big story. Chris Cuomo, and look, there's the headline, returns from his basement quarantine.
All right, here it is. The official re-entry from the basement, cleared by CDC. A little sweaty, just worked out, happens. This is what I've been dreaming of, literally for weeks. This is the dream, just to be back up here, doing normal things. This is for when we go outside. That's what we have to do now, all of us in New York. So anyway, I'm back. Let's get after it.
Which is fine.
This is fine.
Which is absolutely fine. And actually very dramatic and everything. Except for a little problem.
It's a complete lie.
It's a complete lie. Because during that so-called quarantine, he wasn't quarantining at all.
He was out looking at his house being built in the Hamptons. And he even got into a fight with some guy
on a bicycle
who was cycling past, going, "What are you doing out? You're supposed to be quarantining. You've got COVID. The governor says your brother says you're supposed to be quarantining. What are you doing out?" And he badmouthed back at him. He then went home, sat in his basement but later admitted that confrontation happened, but went and got CNN over to film him coming up the stairs.
But now, CNN, I mean, by the way, are apparently supposed to be, I mean, I don't know, last I heard they were meant to be a news organisation, but I don't think so. But I mean, they pretend to be a news organisation. They probably had heard about the bicyclists. They probably had heard about the East Hampton address. And then they went along, CNN, the organisation, went along with this complete lie, this complete piece of propaganda with this guy walking out of his quarantine that he'd never been in the first place.
Yeah. No, this is, as I say,
so he should have gone.
Should have been and the people who allowed that to happen
should have gone along.
Should have been fired from CNN a long time ago, rather than being fired now. So I just want to talk a little bit about the New York Times and their Brazil climate change story. Apparently, Brazil's northeast, the world's most populated dry lands, is going dry, and it's all to do with climate change. And they've got a big story on it. And much of Brazil's vast northeast is turning into a desert, a process known as desertification that is worsening across the planet. Now, Anne, if you're the New York Times saying there's a process called desertification that is worsening across the planet, what's the next thing you would expect?
When did it start?
Yes.
Has it been going on for a long time? Did it just happen recently?
Statistics.
Is there any statistics?
Yes.
Any information?
Yes.
Perhaps we could have some context.
It was,
Could we have some context?
In 1942, it was 27% of Brazil on the planet. In 1964, it was 37. No, you just say a process that is worsening across the planet, and then they never give you any.
That's always
any statistics or any measurements.
That's always like an indicator that there's some information there that they don't want to share with you.
Climate change is one culprit, right? Blah blah blah. And that's what they blame for it. But then later on,
let's find out what the real culprit is.
Later on, they also sort of throw in this paragraph. This is great. So, journalism is so bad nowadays. You can actually contradict your own story within the story, and no one calls you out on it,
except for us at the AP Scoop.
Yes. So they then go on to say Brazil later on in the story. Brazil's northeast, the world's most densely populated drylands. I think calling them drylands was a bit of a clue.
Yes.
Yeah. With roughly 53 million people, is among the most at risk. The region is known for droughts and poverty, inspiring novels about destitute field workers forced to abandon the land, as well as a genre of music, baile, in which accordion-backed lyrics tell of the difficult life there. Sounds very Irish, but so basically for generations after generations,
they even have tradition. They have even folk music about it,
about droughts. Yeah, and about destitute workers being forced to abandon the land.
Nothing new there.
So there's absolutely nothing new there. So this pinning it on climate change is disgusting and disgraceful, and more fake news.
More fake news.
So great women's swimming.
Women's swimming. So Leah Thomas, a 22-year-old, at the University of Pennsylvania, has been shattering women's records at the school. Amazing, shattering records.
At a meet,
including Princeton and Cornell on November the 20th, Thomas had a 1.4347 time in a 200-meter freestyle and 4.3, and on and on and on and on.
Records for Pence, and would have placed Thomas second and third,
respectively,
in the women's champions. So she's the number 2 and 3 in the women's.
Absolutely amazing. And I'm wondering, people who've watched this podcast in the past, is there anything? What is this? Because this is like shattering records in places where records, you know what I mean? This would be where very, very competitive swimmers would be. And the little trick is that actually Leah Thomas was born a boy. And is a boy, actually, but is deciding to be called a girl. But you know what's even worse about Leah Thomas for me is I would be very suspicious of Leah's motives, because Leah, before her transition, had competed unsuccessfully for a very long time as a man swimmer.
She had competed for 3 years at Penn University of Penn, as a man named Will Thomas. Hadn't done anything there, and decided that she was transgender, and is now shattering records.
And what's worse about that is that people are celebrating this.
Yes.
And by the way, if you celebrate this, you are celebrating the end of women's sports. And we've had this.
Yes.
We've done this story before. But it's happening all over the place. But as long as we celebrate this, it is the end of women's sports.
And it's a government-celebrated and government-sanctioned destruction of women's sports. The DOJ has intervened in a court case in West Virginia, and they're supporting these kind of people doing what they're doing. And this is a quote from the legal submission. The United States has a significant interest in ensuring that all students, including students who are transgender, can participate in an educational environment free of unlawful discrimination.
Unbelievable.
There you go.
Horrible. So we've come to the time for the fabulous recipe of the day. The fabulous recipe of the day is a potato recipe. Really, really simple. What I've got here is I've just boiled up these potatoes. These have already been boiled. These are small little potatoes.
And when you say boiled,
and what I would do, and by the way, my trick, and I'll show you the little thing that I use, and I do really love this. I always use this. I boil my vegetables in the microwave. I think people don't use their microwaves enough. Microwaves are great for boiling vegetables and for steaming.
Can I just say something?
My husband disagrees with me on this.
No. As you know, I watch a lot of Gordon Ramsay shows.
Yes.
God, does he hit microwaves? And I feel like writing to him.
It's an elitist thing. It's just elitist nonsense. So basically, get the potatoes.
I feel like writing to him saying, "What?" I mean, because I'd love to know what's wrong with microwaving food. Anyway,
boil them up. Boil them up, and just till they get. The fork can go through them, but not overcooked, basically. So, for these ones at this sort of size, I think 2 or 3 minutes. But watch, all the microwaves are different.
You have to do it differently. When I put it in, it depends how much water you put in, depends how cold the water is. I mean, I had a sharp knife, and what I did was just make sure that the sharp knife is able to go through them.
So anyway, you've parboiled them, basically. First thing that we're going to do is, after they've been boiled, we're going to put some olive oil, pepper and salt, red pepper flakes, and you could put anything else that you like in there. Like you could put in some fresh rosemary, fresh thyme, oregano.
What goes with potatoes? Oregano.
We really do like our red pepper flakes. So that's what
and I think some people put in garlic powder.
And you could put some powder. We put some garlic powder in as well. Actually, let's put some garlic powder in there. Yeah. That's it done. Then we're going to see what we're going to do. Then we're preparing a baking tray with parchment paper. And we're going to roll those potatoes out there onto that, and then with a flat-bottomed glass, we're going to squash them. Squash. Prior to all of this, by the way, I should have mentioned at the beginning, you want to heat the oven up to about 400. Nice warm oven. Even 450, by the way, you could do. And then you're going to squash. See the way they've been all squashed? Put them in the oven there for about... Alexa, set alarm for 30 minutes. 20 to 30 minutes. Ovens are different. That's why I'm always a bit vague on this. Keep an eye on them.
You have to flip them. You have to flip them.
Flip them halfway. Actually, that's very good. Thanks for saying that, Phelim. Flip them halfway, then take them out and listen to how crispy they are. Look at how crispy they are. Yum, yum, yum. I think these will be a keeper. We'll have them in heavy rotation, as they say. By the way, just a random thought there. Did you know that Trump derangement syndrome has been overtaken by COVID derangement syndrome? And I actually blame this random story on COVID derangement syndrome. A woman on a Delta flight between Syracuse and Atlanta was recently discovered breastfeeding a hairless cat.
Shh, you shouldn't say that in front of Top.
A hairless cat. I don't know what I object to most about this story, but everything, obviously.
Can we just have a look at Top here? Top, flick this. Can we get the camera over on Top?
No, listen to this cat.
Oh, no, there he is. No, we got him.
There he is. I got him.
But, I want to know what... Hold on. Tell that story again then.
No, I'm not telling that story again.
No. Look at Top's expression.
So we've come to the end of the show.
No. Tell me that again. No. She was breastfeeding a hairless cat
on a Delta flight.
What is a hairless cat?
I actually like the details of this between Syracuse and Atlanta. Not that I think that tells us anything.
About the people of Syracuse or the people of Atlanta?
We're showing a photograph of a hairless cat right now. Really awful. And anyone who has a hairless cat, don't write in and complain, please. We've come to the end of the show. We would really ask you again to consider giving us a tax-deductible donation at this time. We have raised a lot of money for the movie, but we have a lot of other activities that we're doing here that are important, including a project that you're going to really, really like that's going to come out next year.
Let's just say a Roe v. Wade adjacent project.
Yes, a Roe v. Wade
so
adjacent
go to the unreportedstorysociety.com.
Give what you can.
We're doing
and
good
give
work.
Until it hurts.
And by the way, this Roe v. Wade project, this abortion project, it's
our project.
We do things that people don't do, and we go to places where people are. Rather than sit back and wait for them to come to our projects. So that's why we do movies. That's why we do plays. Liberals go to movies more than conservatives. Liberals go to plays more than conservatives.
We're in the persuasion business.
So we bring that kind of art to these people.
We need to get out of our silo. We
You
can't
were
be
out
in
of a silo.
silos.
And
We
this
can't be
Roe
talking
v.
to each
Wade
other.
project
Yes,
is going to get out of the
gets
silo.
and gets to people who need to understand what's going on with this
Yes,
story.
and it'll be a wonderful story.
So please do give what you can.
Go to unreportedstorysociety.com. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.